Well, I'll just have to tell you, I'm excited about this video. I am so glad that you are joining me for the conversation. For my pipe enthusiast out there, I wanted to share with you before we get started with some more deep conversation, a new pipe that I got from the Gatlinburg in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Now, this is a beautiful pipe with the plateau finish on the top, beautiful grain on it, a little bit of flame grain on the bowl. And I had never heard of this pipe manufacturer before. His name is Hester, I think Charles Hester. And you can buy these from the Gatlinburg, or you can buy them from Missouri Meerschaum. But I've enjoyed smoking that pipe, and actually, I've been enjoying in it some Smyrna number 1 from the McClellan Tobacco Company that, of course, went out of business a few years ago. So it's good to keep first things first. Pipe smoking is far more important in many ways than what we are about to talk about. All right, so wait, no, I have one more thing I wanted to share with you. I've got to do this. As many of you may know, the Confederate Monument Row in Richmond, Virginia was basically obliterated a few years ago. The beautiful Confederate monuments to President Davis, to Jeb Stuart, Robert E. Lee, they were all removed. And a very dear friend of mine, he's a priest. I think he's serving in the Midwest right now. He's got Missouri roots, and he's got some Southern roots. And Father Pat, if you're watching, I certainly do appreciate this gift that I received in the mail from you. But if you'll just look at that, it is a Christmas ornament of the Jefferson Davis Memorial, the Jefferson Davis Monument in Richmond, Virginia, before the barbarians tore it down. And so I'm so thankful for that. And inside of it is a little sticker that profiles the seal of the Confederate States of America. I'm so thankful for that precious gift, because that's an item, ladies and gentlemen, that you cannot buy anymore. I am trying to make sense of a lot of the turmoil happening in the conservative movement in the United States. Now, my interest in this is far less political and more historical. I have been interested in the history of American conservative thought, and particularly the Southern version of that, for a very long period of time. And I'm watching different interpretations of conservatism coming to the forefront in mainstream political discourse. And I think it's interesting. And I think that it makes for not only entertaining politics, but it allows for a discussion that I think we probably needed to have a long time ago. At least in my generation. This is a discussion that we needed to have a long time ago, which is essentially what is conservatism and how does it function within the context of American society. And so I have been harping on federalism many times over the past few videos, and actually I've been talking about the importance of federalism all of my working life, my entire career. I have been harping on this. If you were to ask the people that I taught high school history to 10 years ago, they would tell you that the one term that came up more than anything was federalism. And you may think that that's not a term that's appropriate for this time in which we live, that it's sort of antiquated, that it's not a term that we need to discuss anymore? Well, first of all, what is federalism? It is the idea expressed by James Madison in the Federalist Papers that the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those that remain with the states are numerous and infinite. Now, why is that important? It's important because this notion of there being a single American people, an American people in the aggregate, that has never existed. It doesn't exist. All you have are the people of the individual states, the people of the various regions. As Donald Davidson said, we are a nation of regions. But it wasn't simply the Southern agrarians who argued that. It wasn't simply Thomas Jefferson. It wasn't simply the Confederacy. We have many bright conservative writers of recent times that have said very much the same thing, including Roger Scruton in this book right here. Conservatism, Roger Scruton, An Invitation to the Great Tradition. I want to go to his final chapter, which is entitled Conservatism Now. And he's passed, but this book was written in 2017, so during Trump's first administration. So I want to read to you some insights from Sir Roger Scruton, who is not an American. He is writing about conservatism in the United States from a British point of view. So if he understands the importance of federalism, perhaps we can as well. So this is Roger Scruton. American intellectual conservatism has followed a slightly different trajectory. Now he's comparing it to Britain and Germany primarily. Notwithstanding its liberal constitution, the United States of America is in many ways the place where conservatism as a social and political philosophy has been most influential, both in the intellectual life of the nation and in the practice of government. It is also a place where you can confess to being a conservative without being socially ostracized. Well, okay, a couple of points to take out of that paragraph. Conservatism is not, first and foremost, a political platform. It is that which sometimes remains undefined. When you start defining what you mean by conservatism, then you start to get into some muddied waters, because it's more a way of life, a philosophy, a worldview. It has less to do with politics, far more to do with society and culture. And so Scruton says there are two main reasons for this. The first is that the Constitution was designed as a federal constitution whose purpose was to unite the states while imposing the minimum number of conditions on the diverse people of the Union. On the diverse people of the Union. Diversity as a word is highly significant, important, and a good thing in the context of federalism. We have this notion in our minds now of DEI. And in the context of DEI, diversity is not good. But in the context in which Scruton, as well as the Southern agrarians would have talked about it, it is necessary to recognize. Why? Because the people of the different states and the different regions do not have the same interests. Conservatives are bent out of shape because the mayor of New York is going to be something different than what conservatives wanted. The election was held a day or two ago, and now people are bent up across the country. They're wondering what's this indication that New York City now has a Democrat, socialist, Muslim mayor? Well, if you think about conservatism as something that needs to be latched onto at a national scale, then you're missing the point. What happens in New York City does not affect me here in the hills of Kentucky. I do not care about who the governor of New York City is. It's not my home. Those are not my people. The entire United States is not the hinterland of New York City. This is the wisdom of the founders. And this is exactly what Donald Davidson said in his contribution to a 1936 collection of essays entitled Who Owns America? The sequel to I'll Take My Stand. Davidson made this argument very clearly. He said the diversity within the Union is something that's always been there. The South has always been different from the North. The North has always been different from the Northwest, and so forth and so on. To think that we are a democracy and the American people are in charge of what? There is no single American people in the aggregate. There's only the people of the individual states, as evidenced by the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. The powers not delegated to the federal government remain with the people or to the several states. It means the same thing. So, back to Scruton. A great many matters pertinent to the government of modern communities were left to the individual state legislatures. And he's talking about our 1787 Constitution. And it is in the attempt to recapture powers from the federal Constitution so as to maintain existing customs and traditions that conservative sentiment has been most forceful. Let me say that again because I'm sure you're not going to get all this just on the first try. Now, hang on, I'm going to explain this to you. A great many matters pertinent to the government of modern communities were left to the individual state legislatures. All right, so he's talking about what the Constitution originally intended. More powers remain with local authority, not central authority. And so what is American conservatism doing in the 20th and 21st century in our own time? What is conservatism about? And this is what Scruton says. It is in the attempt to recapture powers from the federal Constitution so as to maintain existing customs and traditions that conservative sentiment has been most forceful. Conservatism works in American society when it places the vast amount of power and authority at the level of the home, the level of the family, from there to the state government. The federal government is twice removed from sovereignty in the American context. Twice removed. Sovereignty resides among the people of an individual state. The people delegate certain pieces of their sovereignty to the state government. The state government then delegates certain very delegated, very enumerated powers to a central government. And one of the main reasons that the central government was created in the first place was to provide for a common defense against foreign enemies. The founders understood that domestically, the Union needs to act as one. Internationally, the Union needs to act as one. Domestically, the Union is made up of individual sovereign states with their own peculiar interests. This is why I have said repeatedly that Trump going after the governor of New York, I don't have it all together here today. Too many Yankee states on my mind, and I don't know that geography well enough. Trump saying to the governor of Maine several months ago, we're going to cut your funding, you better listen to us if you don't stop transgender sports in your state. Well, that's fine, but the people of Maine elected that woman to be their governor, and so if they want to change the laws of the state of Maine, it's up to the people of the state of Maine to do it. It's not the concern of other states in the country. So listen to this, the second reason. And so he's talking about why conservatism is accepted more in the United States than in other parts of Western civilization. And so Scruton gives a second reason. The second reason is connected, namely, that many of the institutions and customs on which American society depends are the product of civil association and not governed either by federal bodies or by the legal structures of the states. Throughout its growth as a modern nation, America has been built from below through the free association of its citizens, a point noted and praised by Tocqueville in Democracy in America. This has offered scope for conservatism as a philosophy of civil society, a philosophy that outlines and justifies the intrinsic forms of civil order against the attempt to control and amend them through the institutions of the state. And I was making a quote today. I made a quote today, a post, quoting Russell Kirk. Now, people are asking me to do a little bit more information on Kirk. I have a video or two in the video library about Kirk, but it's worth touching on him a little bit more because I see that there's this mass confusion among conservatives in America right now to define what it means. And as I said, that's sort of an elusive project. But if I had to really boil it down, I would say that I personally am a follower of Edmund Burke's wisdom, that of Calhoun, that of Jefferson, that of the founders of the Confederacy, that of Russell Kirk, and to some extent Bill Buckley, and more recently perhaps Pat Buchanan. That's a tradition of intellectual thought. To go through the various aspects of that tradition and its history would require an entire college semester of lecture material. But I wanted to touch on just one or two points with you today. The big question that many say is dividing the Republican Party now is the question over Israel. And I had a viewer left a very insightful comment, which included a question a couple of days ago, wanting to know what would Russell Kirk think about the current debate regarding United States involvement and support to the nation of Israel. And so I went back through the articles and books that I had, and I remembered that Kirk had spoke about this a few times, but the most well-known quote, perhaps, from Kirk on this issue comes from his 1988 address to the Heritage Foundation. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that somehow there are a great many neoconservatives who believe that Tel Aviv is now the capital of the United States. Now, several people called Russell Kirk an anti-Semite because of that statement. Russell Kirk was no such thing. His book entitled The Roots of American Order, which is, in my opinion, one of the best pieces that he wrote, he says very clearly that the history of Judaism is where the United States receives a good chunk of its moral code. Its moral code, the Old Testament, is vastly important to the development of Western civilization. And so he was by no means an anti-Semite, but he did question the extent to which the United States should be concerned about the modern nation state of Israel. And just let me, for those of you who don't know this, let me just explain something to you. A nation of people and a nation state is not the same thing. For instance, if we were to talk about the nation of Israel, as it's talked about in the Old Testament, that simply means a tribe. It means a people, a group of people, a culture. It does not mean a nation state. The modern nation state of Israel, which came into existence after World War II, is not the same. That's not the same terminology that we see when we read the Old Testament. Just wanted to put that out there because they are not the same thing. A nation of people and a nation state, which includes a certain people, they're not the same thing, although sometimes they can be. And so I'm sitting here looking at Scruton's conversation about Russell Kirk in this book that I'm referencing. And so let's see what Scruton has to say about Kirk. Strongly influenced by T.S. Eliot and also by Christian cultural conservatives such as C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, Kirk argued that both the ideas and the policies of the many who had reacted against liberal socialist ideas in his time were anticipated by Edmund Burke and also articulated by him in a way from which we could all learn. Well, I mentioned Edmund Burke in a previous video, and what I told you is that you should read Edmund Burke, his Reflections on the Revolution in France, but you'll have to keep your dictionary out the whole time because he had a vast vocabulary. And so people are trying to figure out what conservatism is. What does it mean? Well, I can tell you what it's not, and I'm about to go to Kirk and Scruton again, but I can tell you what it's not. It is not the notion that conservatism is going to make everybody rich, that you won't have to work for a living, that the government's going to solve all of your problems. It's not necessarily anti-establishment either, because conservatism recognizes the need for institutions, properly ordered and properly managed. It is not simply physical. I think for the most part, when people think about conservatism in America now, their idea of that is we want less government, less intrusion into our life, but there's very little discussion of what the foundation of that is going to be. Because if you don't want government to be involved with your life, if you don't want government intrusion, where is the moral code? What type of morality is shaping how you make your decisions? Because if you want self-government, you've got to have a sense of morality. So conservatism is not the absence of morality, the absence of good behavior in the wake of the absence of government. There must be foundational principles that guide the decision-making process in your life. And that involves, as we'll see from Kirk in a minute, a transcendent order. And so here we have in Scruton's book a summary in 5 points of what conservatism meant according to Kirk. Now, this has been described in various ways in different areas, but this is the book I have in front of me. And so this is the one we're going to use. Number 1. All right, so the canons of conservatism, or the states of mind. We have 5 of them. The first one, a belief in a transcendent order, which Kirk described variously as based in tradition, divine revelation, or natural law. Okay? And I'll say this, if you're going to call yourself a believer in a transcendent order, if you're going to call yourself a believer in divine revelation, especially that of the God of the Bible, you need to act like you believe in the God of the Bible. There are certain people who are gaining a lot of popularity in the conservative movement now who don't act very good at all. Their behavior, their mannerisms are vulgar, and how they will be remembered remains questionable. Number 2, an affection for the variety and mystery of human existence. The variety and mystery of human existence. Variety, diversity, in the proper sense of those terms, you see. The United States has never been about having a monolithic culture. Never been about that. There have always been differences. Prior to the Revolution, the 13 colonies had more in common with England than they did each other. The wisdom of the founders was allowing individual states and local communities to maintain as much power over their lives as possible. only delegating certain powers to a central government for very, very specific purposes. Number 3, a conviction that society requires orders and classes that emphasize natural distinctions. Natural distinctions. This is, in one way, you could call this Jefferson's sense of the meritocracy, a natural aristocracy. This is why I despise any talk of white nationalism, any talk of Christian nationalism. I don't like those terms at all. That's not what the founders envisioned. And by the way, if you want to change what the founders envisioned, you need to call a constitutional convention and amend the Constitution. Good luck with that. What we have is the original sense of what American identity was supposed to be. Where do we go to find what that is? We have to go back to the early days of the constitutional period, the Republic, the early Republic period. Natural distinctions, okay? I just better harp on that a little bit more. I've said it repeatedly, and I'll say it again. There's one human race. That's it. I would challenge you to show me through Scripture that there's anything else. The only dividing line is between those who believe in Christ and those who don't. He split the timeline, and that's the splitting mark. That's the mark for everything. That's where you draw the line. I think it's a waste of time to think that somebody who is, and I have to be very careful here. I have to be very careful. I think that it's not fair to say that that you have to be a Christian in order to run for politics and to be voted into office in the United States. And that's largely what Christian nationalism is trying to say. These Christian nationalists. Jefferson was not a Christian. Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian. And yet I think he was at least in the top 3 presidents that we've ever had in the United States. So I think we need to be very, very careful about that. Number 4, a belief that property and freedom are closely linked. Property and freedom. Now, in the state of South Carolina, and this was the case for many other states across the country, up until at least the year 1810, so not too long after the ratification of the Constitution, at least until the year 1810, you were not allowed to vote in the state of South Carolina unless you owned at least 50 acres of land. You were not allowed to serve in the General Assembly unless you owned at least 500 acres of land. Why does that matter? It comes from an old English concept called country republicanism. And the idea in part is this: if you don't have property, in this sense private property, land, real estate, then the belief was that you did not have a vested interest in the outcome of the election. So that's a fundamental tenet of what I would call conservatism if I were to define it. It involves ownership, private property. Number 5, a faith in custom, convention, and prescription, and a recognition that innovation must be tied to existing traditions and customs, which entails a respect for the political value of prudence. Now, that's the point I want to talk about just a little bit more. I do not trust hardly anybody over the internet to tell me how to understand conservatism. I am aware of the irony and the borderline hypocrisy in me saying that. But I don't do the internet thing because I have to. I do it because I feel an obligation to do so. And this is also a statement that, a belief that Kirk held, that you do what you must do. You do your duty. If you live in a self-governing republic, you have to do your duty. And this is all that I can do. This is the best that I can do, is to contribute my thoughts to the conversation. But this fifth point, it seems to me, is the most relevant for the current debates within the American conservative movement. And it's the one that's most missing, that is not talked about: a faith in custom, convention, and prescription. A recognition that innovation must be tied to existing traditions and customs. There's this massive talk among the Zoomer generation, these young men in the Zoomer generation, that we need to create a new America, that the older generation has let us down. We can't buy houses. We can't create a good living for ourselves. We're working 2 or 3 jobs and can't make ends meet. We need something new. All the while, I hear no conversation about the importance of the Constitution, the importance of the founders' vision of the country. None of it. And yeah, I'm talking primarily of Fuentes and his followers. Show me the people. Show me the videos. Put a link below so I can watch it. Show me the videos where Fuentes is having a balanced, persuasive, intelligent, and articulate conversation about how he wants to preserve the Constitution. That's my challenge to you. Put the link in the comments below. I would love to see it. I am willing to be proven wrong on that. Because if he has something to say about that, I'd love to see it. Because he's not the only one. There are other people who have far more of a following than I do, who are following him. And I don't see any discussion of their attempt at innovation being tied to existing traditions and customs. You want to innovate, you want to change, that's good, that's fine. Innovation and change is sometimes necessary, but it must be grounded. It must be slow. It has to be wise. I'll go back to Scruton here. You must entail a respect for the political value of prudence. Is the changes that you want to implement, are they wise? Because what I'm seeing among this disillusioned group of young men in America, I know because I used to be one. I used to be one. You people think that this is something new, being anti-establishment, going against the system. We Southerners have been doing that for a very long period of time. So maybe you can take a few lessons from us. Contrary to Fuentes believing that Southerners are a bunch of backwards hicks. I mean, I have no use for somebody from Chicago who doesn't give the American South the due respect that it deserves when it comes to contributions to American political history, especially the story of American conservatism. So as far as I'm concerned, Fuentes can kiss my lily white Southern ass. He's a fad, but I don't disagree with everything he's saying. The establishment is a problem. It's always been a problem. But to think that your generation is going to solve a problem that others of us have been trying to deal with for decades, well, don't fool yourself. And the other question I have is, okay. If it were me, here's what I would do. I would remove the Federal Reserve. I would remove property taxes. I would seriously force and the Congress to remove federal income taxes. The Constitution allows for the federal government to make money off of tariffs, but the Congress has to be the one in control of the tariffs, according to the Constitution. So where's all the millions and billions of dollars that Trump said's coming in and pouring into the country over the past several months? What's going on with that money? If you're making that much money off of the tariffs, then do away with the federal income tax. Because if you don't need I get it. I mean, this household is self-employed. The thousands upon thousands of dollars that we spend on federal income tax makes me extremely angry. The amount of money that we have to pay for property taxes makes me extremely angry. So I am with all of you people in the sense that you are anti-establishment. I don't like it any more than you do. I don't like the bureaucracy any more than you do. But you cannot fight any of that with the rhetoric that you're currently using. You have to be extremely prudent in what you say. Extremely prudent, knowledgeable. Just not, I don't want to use the word calm because sometimes anger is necessary. But it needs to be a measured response, And don't tell me, well, we did that in the past and it didn't work. If you want to win, if you young men in this country are disillusioned and you want to do something to improve the system of government in this country, you need to listen to other people who are on your side, who are not in your generation, who have learned a thing or two, and think that this response should be tempered. You got to be in it for the long haul. And one thing that I heard Matt Walsh say today in his response to the mayor election in New York City. And he said, how do we fix this? What is our response? How do we take action? And he simply said, we've got to win. Okay, got to win what? Elections? That's part of it. That's just part of it. You don't win elections unless you persuade people that what you have to say holds merit. I am not convinced that enough of people are sufficiently persuaded that the establishment is too big. I was having a talk with a neighbor today, and he said, we in Kentucky, we have a Democratic governor. I said, yeah. And he said, well, it's because of only 3 counties around Louisville and Lexington. I said, yes, but that is, the state on the whole is still very much conservative. Very much conservative. Actually, other than Oklahoma, Kentucky is one of the most consistently red states in the Union. It used to be South Carolina, but South Carolina is increasingly urban. People are moving in from other parts of the world, other parts of the country. And so it's not nearly as conservative as it once was, as is evidenced by those people continually electing Lindsey Graham to the Senate. And by the way, I'm so glad that even though South Carolina is my native state, that's where my people came from, I am so glad to call Kentucky my adopted home. Because I would much rather Rand Paul and Tom Massey be representing my interest than the lughead Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. But anyway, once you take the blue counties in an individual state, that is not nearly as important as the amount of urban and city centers on a national scale. There is not a vast, overwhelming majority of Americans who believe in any definition of conservatism. There is a serious march on the left in these urban centers to destroy the right. So in one sense, I think Matt Walsh has a good point. We have to unify the right. But if unifying the right means that I have to be a sycophant of some dude in Chicago who is vulgar, has no respect for the history of the American South, then we've got a problem. When that starts to happen, I'm not interested in national conservatism anymore. I'm interested in Kentucky first. Kentucky first. Federalism. That's federalism. That's what matters more than all of these online pundits saying that America, the American people want a conservative president. The American people. No, they do not. There is probably close to half of the American people. And first of all, you've got to define what you mean by that. Who's going to be included in your definition of the American people? At least half of the country doesn't want to have anything to do with a conservative worldview. So no, I don't, just because you call yourself conservative, just because you have a big internet following, doesn't mean that I'm going to be a follower of yours. I don't follow anybody. I lead my family. My primary interest when it comes to politics stops at my property line. That's how local I am. Because I can't control anything other than that. When I'm walking my property, we got a couple hundred acres here, and I'm thankful for every inch of it. That's my world. That's the way it was supposed to be. People came to this country for land. They didn't come to this country to create a Puritan empire. The people who came from the old world to the new world wanted land. Why? Because private property, security, privacy, a man's peace and quiet, those are the things that matter. Not shooting your mouth off online every day of the week trying to get people to think that you are the new conservative messiah. I don't respect anybody who doesn't have good manners, who's able to be civilized at all times. If you're somebody that I would not invite to my supper table to be around my children, your part in a so-called conservative movement has no role to play in my life. So I think people who call themselves conservative need to take a very, very long pause. A pause. The answer to our problems is not innovation. It's not something new. It's something very old. But that's enough for this evening. I've already gone much longer than I wanted to. This is Alan Harrelson with the Pipe Cottage. Thank you for stopping by.